us from Professional Music. Thank you so much. And David Marvuglio has really helped put this together. We kind of put this together pretty quickly, so we're really thankful. And of course, Dr. Kim Perlak, and we have our friend who came in here, Alum. We're really excited that you came to join us, Ivan Chopik, and our special guest, Tosin Abasi. So we're going to talk about business innovations, because Tosin and Ivan have created this incredible, it's an instrument line, but it's also an experience and a community through Abasi concept. So we want to talk about, how do you make that happen? But also that Tosin has been, had this incredible career of not compromising your ideals. And that's really important. We're here, we're studying hard, and we're working hard to be the best musicians we can be. And it's really inspiring to see someone who is not compromised and kept that level of virtuosity in all things that you do. And also, I really wanted to comment on your professional grace. That's what I call it. So we're going to talk about all these things about, and also building a community. We have social media. I had to write down the statistics. 498,000 followers on Instagram.
We'll go with 500,000.
Oh yeah, sure.
It's gone up.
All right,
gone
see,
up.
there you go. That's the secret.
6 foot.
130,000 YouTube followers and over 100,000 followers on Facebook. So it'd be great to maybe talk about that, like how you build your audience that way. Your music and your brand. But I guess what I was going to say is, you were with Ibanez and you had a great thing with them, and just reading all your interviews about your experience with them, you never talk badly about them, or sometimes you see some artists and they go, I was with them, But I was really impressed by your, really, I would call it professional grace. Like you showed your gratitude towards your work with them, and then how that spurred you into the next thing. So I don't know you have that naturally in just knowing you, the bit that I do know you, but I don't know if you want to talk about that at all.
I guess, yeah, we could start there. So these are relationships if you ever work with companies that are making gear for you. And behind the scenes, these people all network and know each other. So the pickup companies know the A&Rs at other pickup companies, the string companies, and so it is important to keep in mind that your relationship could be directly with one company, but that stuff does sort of traffic behind the scenes. If you've ever been to NAMM, have any of you been to NAMM before? Okay, well it's like the convention of all of these manufacturers, and you will see that they're basically, they all kind of know each other. So I think it's important to understand that reputation is a pretty direct word, but I think beyond that, I think my experience with Ibanez was good, actually, and I think they did try to make me happy, and so I definitely wanted to communicate that appreciation whenever I do talk about the company. And they're one of the largest manufacturers of musical instruments, and I think it's hard to predict the future, so you never even know when maybe your career might bring you back around to working with a company that you previously didn't work with, or maybe there's people from that company who end up in other companies in different capacities. So just being a person with integrity, I think there's no reason not to do that. A lot of artists actually, they don't take this approach and they do whatever they want, and maybe it garners some interesting press, or they feel like because they have talent they don't have to really treat everyone with respect. You could do it that way. I don't recommend it personally. I think we're all people, and one thing we'll probably talk about is how actual personal relationships, even though it's business, you would be surprised how much people like to hire people they like, whether it's you get a referral for a gig or a session or any of this stuff. There's so much actual interpersonal relationship building that you don't always get this drilled in if you're studying music business, but we've realized that it's still a social phenomenon as far as people liking to work with you feeling you're like honest or have integrity, and that stuff pays dividends. So,
I think that what you just described now about your life and your philosophy and what you two do together is something that's really obvious since you've been here. You know, you're relaxed and confident and happy to see everybody, and everything's just been a nice flow. And I'm wondering, like, when you think about where everyone here is at, and they're young and they're trying to start out, and I'm wondering what advice you have for them trying to find that in themselves, like sort of this confidence that's creative, that builds on relationships. Did you always have that? Or is that something you thought, okay, I'm going to actively work on as you built your thing? And I'm just wondering if you both could answer that in the idea that it would be great for them to hear like what your steps were to get from where they are to where you are now, like what your journey was like.
Okay. Everyone has a different personality. Not everyone's extroverted. Not everyone's socially intelligent. It might not be your fault. You know? It might just be the case that, you know. So this answer, it's like, if I had to try to, I guess, articulate some approach to this, I would say just basic respect with people you're interacting with. Like, so there's things like, at this point, I have fans, I guess. It sounds weird to say, but it's like, every individual interaction you have with like a potential fan is something that they might remember moving forward. It's really meaningful. But there are some artists who get to the point where they're just inundated, or they've lost connection with that being meaningful, and so you might want to talk to them and they kind of treat you like crap in that instance. It's like this never meet your heroes sort of thing, you know, because you might get let down. But I think there's some artists who really, they stay connected to this gratitude that like the fans are the reason they can continue to do what they're doing. It can take a little bit of effort in reminding yourself, but I think it's good to hold on to that. This is obviously like, in the hypothetical future that you are relatively famous, this will be useful information. But even all the way up though, I think it's still like I said, the musicians you're playing with, gigging with, recording with, the people who are facilitating your career in any way, just being a good person, I think it just has this radius that like pays back to you. As far as how you could cultivate this, I don't really know, man. Some of this stuff has nothing to do with music, and it's literally like firm handshake and direct eye contact. I don't know, you know what I mean? Like basic stuff like that. You can even, so I'm an artist in the sense where I'm not very organized, and maybe the emails take a little bit of time to get back to you. Cheryl's probably done with this a little bit.
Tell us more, Ivan.
I'll get back to you.
So this is a component of like working with an artist that can give very type A, business-minded people a bit of a headache. Fortunately, they get it, that you're an artist and your capacity isn't necessarily, it's like you're here because you're creative. But I found that if you can find people who really like, maybe they really like spreadsheets and calendars and emails and stuff, get those people on your team to fill out the blanks. Because I think the modern musician now has to wear so many hats. You guys probably are learning how to record yourselves. You're trying to learn how to promote yourselves on, like, marketing-wise on the internet. There's all this stuff that used to be delivered, like it was delegated to a bunch of other people. I find, like, for me, the things I'm not good at, especially in the sphere of like organization and like the structural stuff, I just try to find people who could be part of my team who excel at that, whether it's a manager or anything downstream of that. So that really helps to round out the picture for you, and you can have people forward-facing in capacities that you don't always have to be the person, you know, negotiating a contract or you know, a rate or any of that stuff. So.
Ivan, what about you, about a general mindset you think would be helpful for them?
Yeah, I think expanding on some of what Tosin just said with regards to fans and the artist-fan relationship, every business relationship is an opportunity for a personal relationship too. So speaking to more internally, like on our team and building the people who manufacture our products to help us bring them to life, there's a range of performance that is a job that's finished. But somebody going above and beyond, or like really looking after every last detail and wanting to do the best, sometimes hinges on the personal relationship and how they feel about you and the company that they're in, and what kind of vision you're structuring and what the role is in it. So I think it's important to cultivate that too, beyond just a clean cut, you know, I pay you this in exchange for you doing this kind of relationship.
Right.
So, and that goes through pretty much every asset of, or every kind of connection that the company or individual has, whether it's internal or external, facing to the customers. There's always an opportunity to kind of foster and develop that.
Is that something that you both look for when you're working with young artists? Like, can you talk a little bit about how, if you're going to work with someone young, what do you look for?
So, funnily enough, we don't necessarily look for that. But, so we have, Ivan and I started Abasi Concepts, which is basically a guitar and effects pedals and maybe more brand. And this is an interesting pivot that we'll probably talk about because apparently being a modern musician, you also have to do other things. So we'll get into that, but one thing we did slightly differently was we leveraged my social media reach to we basically cannibalized it as the brand's reach, and when we sign a guitarist, we kind of act as like a promotional body for that guitarist. So we try to find this we'll just literally be on Instagram. We'll be like, I'll DM him like, yo, look at this dude, he shreds. And he might have, I don't know, a couple thousand followers. But then part of getting him on the Abasi Concepts roster is almost like how a record label will sign an unknown band and then use their reach to push this new talent out to a bunch of people. So we've identified this raw talent that maybe not a lot of people have discovered yet, and then we're able to basically leverage how good they are, but also leverage the fact that we already have a bunch of followers. And the combination creates this thing where all of their profiles rise, and the association to our brand, we obviously benefit. But yeah, the algorithm has blessed us with alien guitar players who are just they're just insane, and it's perfect because like I said, it's almost like a promotional thing too. So they benefit not only getting an instrument that I think is some of the finest stuff around, but they get this sort of profile boost too. But yeah.
Yeah, it goes both ways. We benefit from having these amazing players play our guitars and validate the instrument in their own way. So it's a mutually beneficial kind of setup.
I was going to say a question about that. So how do you get from, you're obviously working and endorsing other guitars to starting your own, in terms of finding manufacturers and people you rely on? Obviously you've met all these people. We're talking, you built this community of So I don't know, just some insight on that, because that just seems like an overwhelming idea. Okay, I'm going to design and have my own company of my own guitars and finding the great, the best people that are going to be able to make that vision happen.
Yeah, there's a lot here. I will say that the internet has given you access to things that I think would have been inaccessible not too long ago. So, let's see. Beyond the internet, there are things like living in a city that is a hub for entertainment. So, you guys obviously are probably considering maybe when you leave here, you might end up in, I'm assuming New York or LA, I don't know. The internet has made it so you don't always have to be centralized in one of these city hubs, which is also great, but to reinforce the human sort of networking thing we were talking about earlier, sometimes it matters that you're in a city where there's a bunch of other entertainment-minded people who actually do things in the industry regarding talent. These are people who can actualize. So for us living in Southern California, it's a hub of manufacturing for musical instruments. All these companies, there are companies, Sir, Tom Anderson, Kiesel, and beyond that, there's all this sort of third-party support for that. So you have people who can spray nitrocellulose, or they have CNC machines, or they have. So we basically, Ivan ended up coming from, where are you living? Oh, you were in Florida. Yeah.
Florida at the time.
Yeah. Moral of the story is the idea to start a guitar brand actually was way more realistic considering we lived in Southern California, because you literally had options of shops that, there's just industrial parks, and you drive to one of these, units, and they're cutting necks and bodies, And so I would just say that made it way less of a pipe dream, It was like, okay, this is real. I can go and talk to the people who can paint and cut necks and bodies and assemble this stuff. So from there you enter a world of, there are these, how do I put it? So I think businesses have culture, and like music business has a culture, even though it's business. There's it's very different than if we were making medical devices or something, right? The guitar manufacturing world is full of a bunch of old dudes who probably inhaled too much paint over the years or something. So I think, I don't know how many of you are studying music business, but me and Ivan talk about this all the time because we had a crash course in the reality of doing business that I don't think a classroom could have informed us any of this stuff. And so I would just keep in mind that you're going to learn on your feet, and you should keep that as a conscious thing to be observant. Don't assume that because something makes sense on paper or was explained to you as this is how the industry standard is, this is how the process is. It doesn't mean that that's what you'll encounter in real life. We definitely, and then this is one of these sort of cliches that you hear in the startup world, but failure as a useful feature of developing. With the right perspective, you can learn from getting burned. You can learn from getting ripped off. You can learn. That might be the reason you never get ripped off ever again. If it happens right the first time.
If it happens right the first time.
Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I wish there was we could say there was a master plan that led to a very smooth formation of, manufacturing process, but it's a lot of trial and error. And sometimes you walk into a place and you see, hey, there's guitars, they look great. You made these, and you will make them for us. And everything seems great, but then the reality sometimes unfolds a little bit different. Mm-hmm. And we also have a fairly complicated instrument to manufacture, so there's kind of unique challenges that come along with that. So a lot of trial and error, and some getting burnt, and some perseverance, I think. For some reason, it would have been reasonable for us to question whether or not this is still the right path, but for some reason we kept going, and that's kind of what allowed us to survive and eventually land on the right people that were aligned with the vision and kind of the quality of what we're trying to bring and the precision of it. But definitely one of the hardest things in the path of building this thing up.
Oh, yeah, it blows my mind. You guys did it.
Actually, yeah. So being naive and idyllic is actually useful because it can be the reason. Your naivete is the reason you don't talk yourself out of doing something, and being idyllic is the reason you have the drive to continue doing it, when more reasonable people would be like, nah. So this relates to attempting a career as a musician as well. How okay are you with, I don't know, sleeping on someone's couch for a little bit? Or do you think you can live out of a van for a few weeks with someone else? On tour? This is real shit. I started to realize that there's a psychological, there's a filter of people who, they're too responsible, or they're too, basically, what I'm getting at is, we think of musical talent and ability as the deciding factor of what careers take off, but sometimes it's who's actually down to go through some stuff. All this uncertainty, financial uncertainty, all this hierarchy of your basic needs. How comfortable are you with being I don't really know what my next paycheck is and where it's coming from, and how long can you sustain that? But you'll hear a lot of these stories of super successful people, and they were almost homeless for a while. So I think there's a lot of amazing, talented musicians who like, that's the part that they were like, I can't go through that. And that's fine, because it's not really a reasonable thing to go through. And it doesn't mean everyone will go through it, but it is part of sometimes your trajectory. And sometimes it's the reason when you come out of the other end, you've got something that's like amazing. You kind of have to go through hell to get it. So it's not the glamorous like thing that you'll hear about, I think, but it's definitely part of the reality, you know.
Go ahead, Ivan.
Small point to add here. You mentioned the age of some of these manufacturing employees and builders. There's an interesting point here because there's, in the 80s we had a big boom of guitar manufacturing in Southern California, and you have the infrastructure of that somewhat still in place and the people that work there continuing and branching off. But there's not a lot of young talent that's coming into that space, and I think there's some real opportunity there because it's few people that strictly, came into it for manufacturing. It's all musicians that happen to also mold into that shape. Mm-hmm. But man, if you're a talented painter in Southern California, you will have work, and you'll be rewarded for it.
That's great to know. Toki, I think this is a good time to throw it to you for what's on your mind for a question for these guys. What are you thinking about?
Well, I think my first question is, what do you all want to do?
Ooh, I don't know. We don't have time for that right now, but what about for these guys?
So, I mean, in order for me to direct the question correctly, I'm not exactly sure what the students are in the room for. But I would like to know how you've been able to maintain your integrity.
That's a good question. I'm not an artist in the sense where I'm, like if I'm doing an interview or presenting myself like personality-wise, I'm fortunate to where it's so like centered on the music and guitar playing and stuff that I don't have to, it's different than I think other genres of music where they're wanting to know more about like personal life and all kind of stuff like that. So maintaining integrity, I think for me is more about the type of music I'm making. Like, I think we all can relate to like the fact that there is some, how I put it, like there's obviously really commercial music. There are musical ideas that are more digestible, but you're here maybe studying music on a level of depth that starts to lose people, like your aesthetic or what you want out of music might not represent what is the most commercially like viable way of making music. So integrity enters the picture at that point where you're like, how committed are you to your vision? And sometimes you can be really rewarded being like, yeah, I know it's a 7.5 minute song, but that's how my songs are, I think because you guys exist, there will be listeners who also are hungry for a type of musical approach that they can't find many places. So integrity with like how I write music and just not getting scared about how that we don't have a lead singer and all these things that are like, there's negative reinforcement that's available to talk you out of your musical like vision. And so the integrity is the part where you hold steady and you don't get scared and you don't get dissuaded from the thing you have as like your musical goal. So that's kind of how I've used it.
Ivan, what about you? Because I think you had a similar experience to people here. You came to Berklee, you were guitar principal. How has your mindset and your approach changed as you developed your career? Because you are a player and now you're in business and you have all this insight and you seem really happy with what you've chosen. And I think like people are looking at options and looking at avenues and maybe not seeing everything.
I think happiness is an important point because I think for some people it's a clear-cut vision. I'm a guitar player. This is what I'm put here to do. I'm going to push that as far as I can or as far as they'll let me.
Yeah.
For me, I always had a broad set of interests. I attended 3 majors here at Berklee.
What were they?
It was a double major in business and performance, and then I finished business. I was 1 credit shy of performance and switched to MPE.
Ah!
So
Whoa!
I was here for a long time. But you know, that broad skill set that came as a result of that. You know, maybe I didn't get to push quite as far as I wanted in certain things, but it made me happy that I was able to adapt to a lot of different situations. And so my early work, you know, I started a guitar magazine while I was at Berklee because I was writing for a school paper and wanted to archive things. That led to some video production. Now I'm doing videos for companies where I can speak with the musical talent because I have a background in you know, having learned music here. But I also have the video angle and I have the audio engineering angle. So all of a sudden, a company was able to hire me and I could basically perform the work of several people and it became a better deal for them. You know, once it came to Abasi Concepts, that's where kind of drawing on all these little different pieces that accumulated over the years and trying to find ways to balance that out. Because when we first started out, it was, you know, we were doing everything ourselves. You know, I was standing in line at USPS filling out customs forms for the first couple of orders going international, and you know, it went from that to, you know, figuring out, you know, you're looking at parts for guitars. One manufacturer has a 6-month lead time. These guys have 4 weeks. These guys require this kind of deposit, that kind of deposit, and you know, working out cash flow and spreadsheets to calculate reorder points and how many things can we order in order to maintain our margins and all those kinds of calculations. It's a different mindset that's required there. But being able to kind of adapt and wear many hats has been rewarding for me. But where the integrity thing comes in is that I enjoy that. For me, that was a natural extension of what I wanted to do. I was always, you know, I was part of many clubs here at Berklee, the different majors and everything. There was always a lot of different things that I was interested in, and I'm happy that I stayed true to that and pursued as many of them as I could.
That's great. Go ahead.
Yeah, and from being a fellow classmate of Ivan's, I always saw your sense of community as well, and I think that's been a big thing. From my outlook, seeing what you've done was a huge contributor to it too. I mean, even how Abasi designs is run, you've always had that sense of community in it as you've grown through those different places.
Thanks for saying that. Yeah, actually, to your point, everything that I do now, I can probably trace to something here at Berklee within a couple degrees of separation. Whether it's an introduction to some person or an old friendship that led to, you know, discovering something new. It's probably
what's crazy is, so our drummer is a Berklee alum who was part of the metal ensemble with you, but I knew you because you had interviewed me through Guitar Messenger. And you brought me to Berklee 12 years ago or something. How long ago was that?
Probably that, yeah.
Yeah. So then when our drummer quit, I was like, Ivan, you went to Berklee, like, do you have any drummers? It's like, oh, I know this guy.
So we auditioned Matt Garska for the metal ensemble that John Forstall and I started here. And one night we were sitting studying for taxation in the music industry and started listening to music at some point. Yeah. Inevitably started listening to music and we were flipping through these different things. I'm like, this is Meshuggah, this is Periphery, here's Animals as leaders. He's like, this is what I want to play. And then believe it or not, you know, I guess maybe like a year after that or so, I got that phone call. And Matt had just moved to Los Angeles and it was a cool opportunity to put these guys together.
So I think this is really cool because I was about to ask you what you were thinking anyway, because I think a lot of you are thinking about, you know, you're going to leave Berklee and then it feels like you could fall off the cliff, or you want to have stuff lined up and you want to go right to a thing. And a lot of what you're saying is like, well, are you willing to go through a struggle? Are you willing to try things and have them fail? Are you willing to... So there's a tremendous amount of courage that takes place. And then at the same time, you can look back later and it looks more like a straight line. It's like, it like makes total sense that the three of you are sitting up here together, but it probably did not look like that when you were starting.
You couldn't have predicted it. Which is why I think the integrity thing it's probably smarter to define a trajectory. Even if you deviate from it at some point, the fact that you've committed to some direction is better than not doing so. Yeah.
It's just funny how the relationships evolve as well, because Ivan and I, we did like, I'm trying to remember what classes we were in together. We never really played together much, even though we were both part of the metal community, but my major my principal instrument was upright bass while I was here. And there wasn't much in the time for metal stuff, and you really like spearheaded that here. And I was like, I'll just play around the scene and stuff, so that's when I started touring with like Ice Nine Kills, playing bass for them and things like that. But then eventually I got asked to teach metal stuff here in the bass faculty, and it's funny because of the noise you created actually gave me a job to come back here and teach. And then it led to other things. One of my first students teaching here was the bassist Jacob Humansky. And then when I got the gig teaching here, you reached out to me asking if I wanted to play in Paint in Exile. Mm-hmm. And I had just started the gig, and I was like, I don't know if I can leave here yet. And you were like, I was like, oh. And then Jacob came and he's like, yeah, I got asked to audition for Paint in Exile. I was like, I can go with him. And I trained Jacob. Really, we worked on all the repertoire for it. And that led him to being able to play with intervals down the line because of the relationships he forged with you there, too. So it's just wild stuff to see how all the things kind of bounce around.
And somehow the world keeps getting smaller as you go on.
Totally.
Dave, since you're here and you also teach in the ensemble department, could you talk, do you have any questions or topics you guys want to address about the ensemble playing part, whether it's the actual playing part or the business part of that?
Sure, let me think about that. I was going to do that a little bit when we were actually hanging with the students, but since we have a bigger group here, we can't.
Right.
How do you all structure your rehearsals at this point? Do you do kind of like... There we go.
So this answer relates to us basically being like a touring machine that like doesn't all necessarily live in the same city sort of thing. You'll find there are a lot of bands like this, and they're at a point deep into your career, you had quite a few albums out, and you get older and you like, have families and stuff, your rehearsals are very focused, and you will basically expect everyone to rehearse the material before they show up, and the only point of the rehearsal is to just like confirm that you can all do it in real time at the same time, but obviously you can. So we are rarely, you know, it might just be like, oh, this set list is a little different than the last tour, so maybe we're adding a new song or something like that, but the amount of actual like practicing occurring, it's different. Like when I was younger, rehearsal, we would write songs in the rehearsal room. You know what I mean? There'd be like, now it's like you've worked on your parts and the rehearsal is more of like, just like, I don't want to call it dress rehearsal, but it's like you're just basically that one step before hitting the stage sort of thing. So we might do a lockout for maybe 2 days. Maybe the final day actually has full production. But yeah, there isn't, the point is basically like you already can play this stuff, maybe you haven't seen each other in 6 months or something, and you're imminently going to hit the stage, so you get together to rehearse it.
And was there a certain turning point where you felt that Animals got to that point that allowed you to have it in that way versus the bands where all right, we all have to be around the same area, we're going to be in a band together the entire time? When did that kind of turn over?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's more, depending on like how much income the band's bringing, this allows for some degree of flexibility as far as like, if you do want to, because there's a point where we're all living in the same house, and it was easier to pool the band's income and rent some house in the San Fernando Valley, and it was probably not too dissimilar from like a dorm situation, like our living room. We had the drum set in the living room, and we had a PA and stuff. Like, yeah, it was very. So it was like that for a while, and then eventually you can get to the point where you have the resources to basically like live on your own and actually pay for a rehearsal space. Maybe you have, like we currently have like an actual studio space. We have musical instrument storage. We have these things, but I don't know. That's just more of like over time. Hopefully, if the band's doing well, infrastructurally you start to grow a bit. You know what I mean? And you can have this sort of like setup. But Yeah, the way we rehearse is like, it's not that it's inorganic, but the music is, it's complex to the point where a lot of the way it's written and internalized actually occurs like around the computer, you know? Mm-hmm. And so you're not going to be in the rehearsal space being like, yeah, this riff is it's in compound meter, and the first meter is 15, 16, and then it goes to two measures of 7, 4, and then it goes to a measure of 5, and then it, like, okay, cool, that's not really jamming, you know? It's like, bro, like, so you kind of have to, like, we kind of compose in a way that isn't necessarily real-time playing, we internalize it, and then when we rehearse, it's like I said, it's like, everyone's kind of already worked this stuff up to a degree. We're ironing stuff out when we get together, like minor details, you know? But yeah, you guys are probably used to that as far as like using your laptops or DAWs to like kind of compose and stuff, so probably sounds pretty familiar at this point.
I want to ask 2 more questions, and then maybe we can have some time for things that are on your mind, as Toki was saying. But one thing I want to hit on is what you just said about your relationship to practicing. Because I think when everyone has this sense, you probably all have this sense, that there are so many different things that you're going to think about in building your career. You should not play poker because your face, as we talk about this, you're like, whoa, there's so many things and I love it. But I'm asking this question because of these reactions, and I know this is on a lot of your minds. Like, so then you also have to balance practicing your instrument. And to the integrity question, you know, you have music that's complex, that you care about. And a lot of times people are worried about time. And how did you handle that over the years? Like really putting in the time that was required on your instrument to play at a virtuosic level and then devote time to these different things?
Yeah, all right. You're at school now and your job is to like play your instrument all the time. And your life won't always be like that, and I think there'll be a point in the future you'll look back and be like, dang, I used to just play guitar like all the time. Like, that's what I did. So embrace the fact that this is a very focused period of your lives, even if it starts to feel like a grind. Like, I think there's this groundwork you're doing here that like, yeah, you won't always have the opportunity to basically just be a student of your instrument, because life imposes. And then ideally, you're doing so much work here that when you leave, it's more of just like actualizing your ideas. You've done all the groundwork, technically, theoretically. Then you're just like, well, what do I want to say? You know. So then your practice might change to more of a maintenance thing, and like you can lean more on like the creative output as opposed to like learning stuff. You'll probably always learn to a degree, but it's different than what you're doing now. So that's kind of, I think every musician basically, once they are a working musician, they have a relative degrees of success. I would say there's obviously going to be a trajectory to getting to the point where your guitar or whatever instrument is paying all the bills. So I used to find gigs, like jobs that had flexibility if I wanted to leave for tour. I mean, this is before, all right, this sounds lame, but it was before you could drive for Uber and do all this other gig economy stuff, but honestly, living in LA, the amount of actors and comedians and dancers and musicians who are driving rideshare and deliver, it's like, all right, yeah, like, you got a few nights of the week and you can basically make some money. Like, it's very different than, like, having a job that you can't take time off from. So, moral of the story is finding flexible types of work that can supplement your income until, ideally, your playing is paying all of your bills. But there's no shame in, it's not like the starving artist thing, but there's no shame in being so committed to wanting to make art that sometimes you're foregoing a degree of financial security. Ideally, it's a temporary state on the path to like, doing the music full time. But as far as practicing is concerned, there will be a point where you'll have to juggle it, fit it into being a human in a, like a well-rounded way. But since you're here right now, like I think you get to shift that balance just towards playing, which is like, kind of don't forget that part.
Yeah. Ivan, what do you think about that?
I think for me, as far as practice, it was very disciplined here. I tried to, spend as many hours as I could in the practice room, but later on things do get in the way. And what I'd say is important at that point for me still is whenever there's a wave of inspiration to kind of ride it as much as possible.
Yeah.
That's kind of like an internal boost that sometimes you can harness it, sometimes you can't, but when you got it, to really lean into it and take advantage of it. Because it's so easy to get distracted when, you have so many other things on your mind that you have to take care of, and they're not optional.
Right.
So, actually, observing you also over the last decade as a guitar player, there'll be times where I see you, like, you might not connect with the instrument as much, but then there'll be a moment, and for like a month, he disappears and then comes back and emerges. It's like, I have a new technique. Here's a body of work around said technique. So there's almost like this, I've noticed this in a lot of high performers period, is there's almost like an obsessive nature. We can argue about the degree of how healthy that can be, depending on how far you push it. But I do see as a common thread in high performers that when they get in, they try to go deep, and it's almost, you can't distract them if you tried at that point in those moments.
Right. Before we open it a little more, Toki, what they have been talking about so far is a lot what you advise students as the chair of pro music, like piecing together all of the interests and starting to honor them. Is there something on your mind that has come up?
Well, a big part of what we try to do is make sure that students are developing communities of participation. So, who are you? Who are the members of your community? How do you communicate with each other? How do you build networks? How do you be of service to the community, or not just to always take from, but to be able to offer something in return? My big question for you both is, what is the importance of crossing over into other communities? One of the things, I think, I'm from the hip-hop community. Hip-hop, some electronic music, house. So there are people in my community that are huge to everyone in our community, but no one knows outside. And I can say even, my ignorance about your work, until being a part of this, I had to go do my research. And now I'm like, I'm amazed by this person that I have no relationship from before. And then I start going down the rabbit hole, and I'm like, animals as leaders. And I'm like, Ishmael, I just read Ishmael. So I'm making all of these little connections. How important is it to focus on your community? And we could put a bubble around it and call it progressive metal, or however people define online, and crossing over into other people's mindset spaces, communities, and developing those relationships.
Yeah, all right, so you're reminding me that, so when you say communities of genres, it reminds me of scenes. So if you live in a city, there'd be the house scene, there'd be the hip-hop scene. And this is before the internet, and it used to be you would basically be in a community where it mattered if you had human contact with the other people in the community. Because there'd be certain venues that played the music you like, and there'd be certain local dudes who played the music you like. And so that was actually real community. And it mattered because I remember touring when I was younger, and the Baltimore scene for, say, hardcore was kind of different than the one in Jacksonville. There was continuity because we liked the same music, but they had local players in the scene, So I think a lot of that stuff has now ended up on the internet. And so it's hard to answer your question, but I do think that we are finding community online, even if it's algorithmically pushed.
Right.
So, not to drill the integrity point, but the thing that amazes me about the internet is that you could have the most obscure, distinct interest, and then eventually you'll realize, there's a message board for this, or there's a forum, or I'm not the only. So, if you are doing something musically and you really feel committed to it, I think eventually, if you're putting it out there, there will be this sort of community that organically starts to. You'll either find people already into it, or they'll find you, and so. I don't know if we're going to come full circle to meaningful human connection outside of our phones and stuff, but it seems that the community networking part has kind of ended up online now. Yeah.
What about the festival circuit?
Festivals are great because you mentioned like so one bubble to the other. Festivals have gotten to this point where they're not really genre specific anymore. You get like this mix, and so it can be cool to get put on them because then there are random people who never would have thought maybe they like progressive instrumental music, but they're walking from one tent to the other and they see your band. So it's a very direct exposure thing if you can get on those.
I have a question or topic maybe I'd love for you guys to talk about is, coming from, well, there was a time where you put out a vinyl record and it was distributed, and then it turned into CDs and that was distributed, and now there's this time where it's all digital release. So you've crossed over those times. So I guess maybe talk about some of the issues, the good points and bad points about that, and also just royalties, making sure that your stuff is protected. I think sometimes when you're young, you're like, oh, I just want to get my music out there, and I don't care who, how or why, and then, you can get taken advantage of, which I guess is one of the things you were talking about earlier. Sometimes those failures are really how you learn. But I don't know, just to dig into that a little bit, because, myself, I'm mystified by this too, and, thinking like, wow, what's the next direction for my release? And everybody here is now currently in this time of digital release, so they don't know. They don't know from CD. They don't know from vinyl. So anyway, I don't know. Just whatever you can share with us or your experiences with that.
It's the nexus of so many things because.
And can I add to that question? And does that help reinforce your desire or the order of importance of building gear?
Okay. Let's see. One thing I've noticed is so there's a generational effect. Like, how did you grow up, and what was your connection to the medium? Records are bigger than CDs, so the opportunity for artwork and the actual experience, right? Do you guys do you own physical music? Yeah. Okay, so this is really interesting, and this is you'll have large trends in how people consume music. So the obvious thing is that streaming is how people do it, but it's actually genre specific, and we've looked into it, and apparently metal and metal and stuff like that, people they buy more physical copy than say someone who's into rap or dance music. They apparently have no real desire to own physical music, but there's still fans of metal who are buying. Funny enough, vinyl has reemerged as and what's cool about that is that even though the trend is away from physical music, there's this nonlinear relationship to basically archaic forms of giving people. So it's why is anyone buying a record player? Well, they're just doing it because it's almost novel. You could argue that the listening experience is fun, but I think counter to all the data, there'd be no reason to make vinyl. But if you actually look at it, it could be one of your highest margin items, and you can actually amplify the margin because now it's we make vinyl. There's a rarity component to it, and your hardcore fans, they know they're buying it not because they have to, but because they want to. So I think this type of counterintuitive truth will continue to emerge because we're going to get into things with AI generated music and stuff like that, and it'll be to the point where you're only paying for human music because you want to. You actually don't have to, So I think people consume in ways that don't always make reasonable sense. But we're artists, and it's not really about reason, It's art. It's supposed to transcend reason. So I think it's cool to keep that stuff in mind. But it can make it really hard to decide a strategy on how to release your music. So, so Sheryl, you probably released everything from vinyl to CDs to online.
I just put out vinyl, and it's doing well. I know I sold more than if I put out a CD.
Right.
So
yeah. And I mean, but I myself enjoy vinyl, and I love that whole thing of
and there are other people like you.
Yeah.
And I think it gives people a relationship to your body of work that's very different than just like a playlist. Do you know what I mean? The other thing I was afraid of is the importance of an album as a body of work being lost, because people are on Spotify just being like, we'll put out a record. Sometimes this will happen to us. We'll put out a record. We'll go to play like a deep cut and we'll realize like, this must not be on any playlist because people don't know this song.
Well, that's the thing with your music. It's so, it's almost like soundtrack. Like, that it's a whole experience from beginning to end. So, but
ideally.
Yeah.
So I think, I don't want to make presumptions about how you guys write music, but I think like you're probably into complex music, right? And so just remember there are other people like you, and so you don't have to necessarily just drop singles because you're like, well, it doesn't really matter. You can actually go hard on a concept album. And what's interesting is that it might actually start to be like more noticeable because there's so few people actually doing like these large bodies of work that have a lot of concept behind them. Because, I don't know, like, did you notice that hip-hop started to do this thing where it's like, they wouldn't even promote the album and all of a sudden there's just like a new song. It's like, there's a new Drake song today. And you're like, I remember it was months of promo. You know what I mean? So it's like...
It's following dancehall culture.
Okay.
Dancehall records. You would have a new dancehall record every week. It was all about the rhythm. It wasn't necessarily about the content or quality of the song. It's about what's going to be the next thing that gets people to move or to talk.
And everyone wanted to be like first to... And you know what's funny with that is that there was kind of a novel effect to like, instead of doing a bunch of obvious like promo to the new album, it would be like, you'd wake up and there'd be like a new Drake song or whoever it is, new Kendrick song, and then that had this outsized promotional effect. Because then it was like, I didn't know this was happening. And people were almost like, inverse of like promoting it and drilling into people's heads, it was more like, you didn't get the memo and now you have to scramble to hear this new thing.
Right.
So I think there are many ways to skin the cat as far as how to release music today. Because I think the old approach of like doing a build-up still makes sense, but I think also maybe not doing an album and just like releasing individual tracks, maybe even between cycles of bodies of work, you can still keep listeners engaged by occasionally just dropping one-off songs. We have a lot of options, which can be like, it can make it hard to know what the most effective strategy is. So I think whatever point you are, I'm assuming you haven't released a ton of music, I think the goal is to build a fan base, and I think that is best achieved by making your music as accessible as possible. So like, when I did the first Animals as Leaders album, I actually leaked it on purpose before the label put it out. Because there used to be this thing where albums would leak, right? It was like, the new Eminem album is on freaking, what was it, Napster or whatever? And so that would have its own effect. That was almost like this like guerrilla marketing thing, because technically you could get it illegally, and that had its own sort of like...
Nine Inch Nails did a similar thing where they dropped USB drives in clubs all over the U.S.
That was cool. Yeah, that has like a freaking...
So it's like you're in a bathroom and you just find a USB stick.
Yeah, there's a new album. So what's cool about... my assumption is that you guys are into, let's say progressive metal. The community is interested in that, and it's relatively small compared to pop music. And so people really like talk about stuff that they think is interesting. And there's all these message boards, whether it's like extended range guitar or like amp modeler, forums, or... So we did this thing where it wasn't just leaking the album. Misha, the guy I worked with, was on a lot of recording forums. People would like share their mixes and they talk about the software they're using. So he would post like links to it on there. And it's almost like a mini internet where there's kind of this own dynamic of like what is popular, and you have a level of concerted interest because everyone's there for a reason. So depending on the type of music you're making, you can, basically the idea is to get it out there because like before you monetize anything, you want to create some sort of demand for it. It's easier to monetize after the fact, but you have to be, people have to know what you're doing first. And so, fortunately for you, you can make music way cheaper than you used to be able to. So your initial investment is just your time. And basically, I would just try to get as much exposure as possible. Your options from there are a lot easier than if you did it the other way around.
I think there was always a push for short format, really digestible music. I mean, that hasn't really changed, whether it's a shorter TikTok now, but for me, when I was growing up, it'd be on the way to school, there's the radio, and it'd be the same 5-6 songs in rotation, and chances are it's the same song structure, and it's about 3 minutes long.
Right.
You know, so I don't think the push for something very accessible has necessarily changed, but maybe now there's an opportunity because you can reach more people more directly with so many other avenues. Those who do want to go deeper, you have the opportunity to offer them something, whether it's a vinyl record or a progressive masterpiece, double album set, whatever it is. There's an opportunity to do both. You can do short form content and hopefully use that as a hook, but give people the opportunity to dive deeper, because just looking back at popular music throughout our lifetimes and before that, it was always people who wanted to go dive deeper and study more. I mean, probably everybody in this room falls into that category. So,
I just wanted to say quick that I love the curiosity of it, because I think there's a lot of kind of doomsday feeling like nobody listens to music anymore, nobody cares about albums, and what you're saying is you just got curious about it, like, well, is that really true?
Yeah, it's not as that straightforward as that. There's probably more people listening to music more of the time than there ever was. Because you can constantly access a cloud of all the songs, and you can stream it in. And then I think even with the TikTok thing and how music is now part of this bite-sized content reality, it's still infusing music into this multimedia sort of thing. So there are novel ways to consider how you release your music that actually disregard the traditional ways of calling it an album or calling it. You could have a visual component, and people might be equally as compelled by what they're seeing, but your music is the soundtrack to it, and so there's like an opportunity to get them on two angles. So I think, really thinking in novel ways. With the vinyl thing, I think there's a value added that is more than the music. You're buying a physical object, and there are ways you can lean into that, like maybe do really deluxe packaging and just arbitrarily build up that, add things to the vinyl packaging that make it like desirable as a physical item, even without the music part. There's just ways you can reinterpret like what a release is, and the internet makes it really easy to pull all this off. So keep your minds open.
Toki, did you want to continue?
You touched on it.
Yeah.
That many people buy vinyl records but will still download the music or have access to download it for free or whatever. It's really about having a very large picture in their house of something that they love, and if the packaging has something else that I could never get online. I was on a label one time, or back in the day, that used to always have this saying, you can't download a t-shirt. You want to be able to touch something, and if you can bring it out into your world and put it on your body, and that's another part of this other forms of merchandising, something that you put on your body and you wear that represents a community of people, so that when I walk up to you, we don't even have to ask what you're into. Like, I know what you're into based on what you're wearing. And so my further question is, how important is physical representation, not just in your music videos, the way you present yourselves in a live setting, the way that you present your packaging, the way that you design your gear, what colors you choose to use, whether it's glossy, matte, all of these things. How does that play into the bigger picture of the representation?
Yeah, these are great questions. So you're basically describing things that constitute like a brand in a way, which is not my favorite word, but you know what I mean? You kind of like have to basically define your aesthetic offering. You become an identifiable brand. It's funny because the brand's an abstraction, and it's interesting with animals as leaders. I wanted the aesthetic of the music to give people just a headspace that felt like otherworldly and really kind of like that's like the inspiration behind it. And so a lot of the aesthetic choices, I just leaned on this sort of like cosmic, trippy vibe, but with kind of like a metal thing. But with Abasi Concepts, we had to build a brand. And this is when we started to realize that like there are irrational components to a brand. It's a psychological relationship with an abstraction. It's like there are luxury goods that if you actually quantify the build of materials, there's no reason you would charge what ends up being charged for the thing. So what you're paying for is an association. I mean, if you dissect the Louis Vuitton bag, or if you part out a Porsche and you quantify all those parts, that's not the retail price, obviously. But they're able to get you to pay that margin in between. And the amount of margin in between relates to how strong the abstraction of the brand is. Because then you're like signaling to other people, I have enough money for this. Or I care so much about watches that I paid for this one. So baked in is this whole thing that actually is not a one-to-one relationship with like how much hours and what the materials were to build said object. And so we knew with Abasi Concepts, we wanted an aspirational guitar brand that was like, it's kind of the vibe where it's like, man, that's pretty pricey, but that thing looks sick, and like, one day I'm gonna have one of those. You know what I mean? And it was a thing where we actually looked at luxury brands like, it sounds lame, we looked at Ferrari, we looked at Rolex, we looked at, and there's this way in which they indirectly signal to you, like, you want to be part of this. And some of it is not vaporware. It's literally like, some of the hurdles we've gone through, you were talking about matte versus glossy. We do this thing with our finishes where we combine gloss and matte on the same body, which anyone who is using a buffing wheel and paints guitars is like, they hate us. Because it is so easy to ruin the transition between the gloss and the buff, and the only difference is which parts are buffed and which parts aren't. And it takes a skilled, it's skilled labor, and all these other brands do it way simpler. We've had hurdles where we could have had manufacturing, but they're like, why would we build your guitar so we could just build these bolt-on strats that are like, you just put the neck in the body and it's fine. We have this like asymmetrical transition between the neck and the body, and like, but the integrity we wanted to hold on to is like, we're not doing this just for fun. We're doing this because the end result is like really impactful and it's worth the effort, and we think there are guitarists who really care about this, and there aren't a ton of opportunities to get something like this. So it might cost us a year, it might be a reason something comes out a year later, or we can only make so many of them. But that commitment to this like type of approach has resulted in kind of a scarcity, which kind of doubled back to benefit us, because now there aren't that many. So there are more people who want them than what exists. And you create this issue where basically they sell out really quick, and they're worth more used than they are what we price them for. It's like a gray market situation, right? So companies will start to do this. They'll artificially, or not, they'll throttle the amount of like availability, which basically is lower the amount of demand for the actual product, which leaves the surplus demand, which now increases the value of the item in the community of people who want the item. Because they're like, fuck, the next drop isn't for another 6 months, I really want these shoes, or I really want this car, I want this watch. I will pay 40% more than the company actually is charging for it just to have one now. So,
of course, we can talk about that as a sales strategy, but our reality is it's actually hard to complete as many instruments because skilled labor and all the details involved. But I think one of the things that we've been rewarded for is being perhaps deliberate with some choices and sticking to them. Like there's some of the color choices that we would make, you're really into car culture, you got me into it, and a lot of our color choices come from that world. And even though we deviate and we have some natural finishes and some other things, there's an aesthetic there that's kind of, you can associate it with the perception of our guitars and the brand. Same thing with the design language, the curves. Typically a lot of instruments used in heavier music will have more of a masculine design energy, with harder curves or, pointier shapes. We have there's a bit of a feminine, design language element that's included into this, but being deliberate and sticking to those choices as a kind of like a primary vision, I think, has helped define what this company's instrument is in the eyes of the consumer.
That makes sense. I mean, what I'm wondering too, so you put all this thought into everything you do, it's clear. When you have music that comes out in small bites, I think a lot of young players feel this pressure to put their music out on social media all the time. Mm-hmm. It's like if you're not posting something every day, or you're not posting something all the time. And so we see varying degrees of thought that goes into those daily posts or frequent posts. Like sometimes people have thought about what they're wearing, they've thought about what they're playing, they've thought about their sound, they've thought about the concept, there's a series. And other times it's I'm practicing in my house or something. Mm-hmm. Do you have thoughts or advice about that? I think people are so afraid to not put out enough content that sometimes they don't think enough about what the content is, if that makes sense?
This is super pertinent to modern guitar playing and
help us.
The internet. So, in the beginning, Sheryl mentioned my Instagram account, and you were kind of well, how did you go about it? I had zero strategy, and in fact, I remember when Instagram added video, I was like, oh cool, you can do video, and it was 15 seconds long. So I just started putting up things I was practicing. But sometimes when you're practicing, you might stumble upon a cool lick or a cool concept. And I was like, I think there are other guitar players who would think this was cool. And it would just be my phone on the desk. And then they extended it to a minute long, and I was like, oh, I can do longer ideas, but I didn't change from basically being here's a window into kind of what I'm working on in my own shed, basically. And this is what I wanted to see from other guitar players who, especially dudes, I want to see what Eric Johnson's practicing. I know what his records sound like. I want to see what he's practicing. I want to see when he's sitting by himself, what is he working on? And to me, the social media window into this candid window into our lives, I thought that was a really cool thing. If I could see what John Petrucci's messing around with on the guitar, I would click on that. You know what I mean? So, to your point about how curated it is, I think people value a type of transparent authenticity. Obviously, if you're a known player, if you're Joe Bonamassa, he gets away with setting his phone down on a new $60,000 amp and being here's what I'm doing today, because his normal output is so curated and developed. It's novel to see him in the green room warming up. But it doesn't mean you guys can't do that. And I think, if you think of it that way, it takes the edge off of needing to have the perfect lighting and direct recorded audio and all this stuff. Because like I said, we are discovering guitar players who have set their phone down on a desk, but they're phenomenal. The rest of the stuff, you can be yeah, get this guy some lights and makeup, I guess, eventually. But it's the raw talent is visible without any of the flash. So don't overthink what you're doing. And I know social media is annoying, but it's kind of, that's just the reality of things. And I've discovered so much cool music and beyond through it. So I think if you take some of the cynicism out of it, you can flip it, and it's actually kind of you never really know what gets picked up and pushed out to tons of people, man. And you don't have to overthink it. There'll be opportunities to like put a ton of effort into like curating it over time, but if you don't have eyeballs or ears on it yet, then you'd be doing that in a vacuum anyway. So I would say like, don't overthink it. It's fine if it's unrefined, and use that stuff to your advantage.
Can I ask a follow-up? What is the difference between, maybe in your mind, between something that is frequent or on a schedule versus appearing to be forced?
Okay, this is a good question. I might be bad. I might be a bad person to answer this because I don't engage the algorithm in any way that respects the fact that it probably likes post frequency or it likes right there. I think there's ways you can discover. People are always trying to figure out how the algorithm is like working, why it pushes out certain content. Is it a certain length? Is it how often you're posting it? You can get into that stuff. I'm sure there's all sorts of influencers and subsequent sort of like managers of influencers who have all the data on like, oh no, you need it to be at least 28 seconds long, and you need it to be this rate. But what's nice is that you also don't have to do that. So I personally had no strategy, but I was just, I did post pretty frequently just because I was like playing a lot. And so even without the strategy, it's still like the algorithm picked up a lot of stuff and kicked it out to a lot of people. So I would say there's two approaches to it. You could dig into the analytics and really try to curate to, please the algorithm, or you don't necessarily have to, and it can still work.
Yeah, I think that you get to a point where people are looking for you as well, and they want to be a part of knowing. I remember always growing up, somebody wanted to be the first one to have the album so that they could tell everybody else that you didn't have the album. Or you want to be the first person with the pair of shoes, the first person with the shirt, so that you can tell everybody I was the first person with it. Oh, you didn't know about this? Yeah, oh, yeah, that came out last week. That kind of attitude carries over into the people that we love creatively. Right? I want to be able to say, I discovered this before someone told me to like it.
To that point, when you were younger and you felt maybe, is this going into the vacuum, did you know things about like how to tag things or how to do that? Or did you just put it out and it kind of ended up with a life of its own?
I'm really glad you asked this because I had a video, basically I got an 8-string guitar made from this custom luthier. This is at a point where 8-string guitars you had to get them custom made. And I made a little thing on it and I put it on YouTube. And I was just like, custom 8-string guitar. And I just knew that there were people who would be interested in 8-string guitar, because I was, right? And I was part of some like extended range communities. But it ended up getting a ton of views, I think partially because of how distinct that community was. So like, there's a type of like reality within the reality of the internet, to where if what you're doing is really niche, like it'll obviously attract the people who are into. It could be little things like multi-scale. Like I remember when fan fret guitars were like, they were very rare. So if you were playing a multi-scale guitar, there would be people who would encounter your stuff because like they were also interested in extended range guitar or whatever the case was. So I think there was a degree of like speaking to my like online community in an indirect way, that basically like the way the algorithms do work is they try to find what you're interested in. They try to predict what you want to see. And so if you're doing something distinct, that can be really advantageous because how many people are doing the same thing.
Right.
Yeah.
We've made an attempt on the company socials to analyze what's performing best, what's working best as far as, trying to understand the algorithm, but really the conclusion is the whole purpose of the algorithm is that it does change and evolve over time. Because people find out what it is, and then they tend to exploit it. And then that exploitation actually takes precedent over the actual content and connection. That's where I think it's easy to get caught up in trying to do things a certain way, a certain degree of production value, because it seems like it has connected to people previously. But the one thing that's a constant throughout all these years is just the news cycles are shorter. Something comes up, it goes through in the same day, and being more present in people's eyes, that's what kind of forces us to post a little bit more frequently. And maybe there'll be some variability in the quality of the posts, but I think focusing on the content as just a genuine connection with your viewers first before putting production value or certain algorithmic considerations. I think just having the priorities shift towards the relationship above the other things is important, because the other things are changing and fleeting. I've confirmed this through a friend who works in the SEO world, so search engine optimization. People will pay great money to show up higher in Google rankings for different searches, and it's different intervals, but we know that Google issues an update where whatever they're trying, whatever keywords are being used, whatever links are being sent back a certain way, they change that over time purposely because people figure out what it is. They put a lot of money into figuring out what it is, and they attempt to exploit it, and then that gives unfair advantage to those who figured it out and exploited versus those that are actually posting content. So search engines, social media, it's in their best interest to prevent that from happening, to prevent that from becoming a system. So something important, I think, to keep in the back of your mind as you're curating content and asking yourself why you're doing it, and let that inform what kind of content you're making.
You ask all the time is, what is your why?
Yes.
And that's something Ivan just said. And I think it's something that's hard to keep in mind when you're thinking, swirling around with all the pressure that you feel to get good and then get your stuff out there. So I appreciate that sentiment from you. Okay, now because you're such an attentive, smallish group, Sheryl, I wonder if we could do something radical and ask if you have any questions. Does someone have a question?
And maybe we'll run a mic over, we'll run from the end.
We can run from
We'll be
there.
the Oprah. We'll be Oprah.
Phil Donahue, for those of you who are in the Generation X.
Hey, I was just wondering, there's a pretty clear, stylistic shift in your music and around, between joy, emotion, and madness and many, in my opinion at least. And this is also around the time that you're transitioning from the TAM 100 to Lorada. What's the correlation there?
That's an interesting question. It is not Lorada, it is Matt Garska joining the band. Because the madness of many, we did that album as a trio, and we normally work with someone in a production capacity, whether it's Misha or we've had a few other people, but the Madness of Many was the first album that was really insular, just the three of us. And Matt brought forth a lot of drum-focused ideas. So songs like Arithmophobia were actually fully drum compositions that we added harmony to. But you get this stylistic shift because it sounds very different than if it wasn't written on the drums for a sort of thing. And then the others, I don't know. I think we leaned a little bit more on. There's this sharpening of the knife sort of thing that I think some bands over time start to consolidate the amount of musical ideas in their output, and they start to just amplify certain elements of it. And I think our sound started to crystallize a little bit in that way, where we kind of knew the fundamental parts of what's gonna make our sound, and we just kind of went with that. There's less conventional rhythm guitar playing, and there's a lot of things on the earlier albums that started to get filtered out for more novel techniques, which started to just feel now this is kind of our sound. So that's kind of why it changed. Yeah.
I want to insert a question. Could you talk for a minute about how you think about tone and sound and how you work on it?
Yeah, jeez.
It's my favorite topic. I can't resist.
Tone is your voice, right? That sounds kind of cheesy, but it's kind of how you want to, what you hear in your head, what you imagine you sound like your instrument. So you find the gear and you find the stuff that seems to speak to you. And maybe part of this is because you really like how the Black Album sounds, or you really like how Chaos Fear sounds, or whatever. But you kind of you end up like finding the gear that kind of can articulate what you hear in your head. And then sometimes you end up in a territory where there isn't much to pull from. So the 8-string guitar doesn't have a ton of history. So I started to look at the few bands who use 8 strings and also just think, between the 8-string and a lot of the techniques I'm doing, there is nothing to pull from because no one's really doing the same stuff. So I think that's more of like just molding it to represent what you hear in your head. And then eventually it's gotta work in a mix, right? So
Right.
I think that starts to become a learning process over recording, which is really cool how many guitar players basically have to record themselves now as a feature of being a guitar player.
Right.
This used to not be a thing. So I think the tone question's probably, these dudes have probably all figured out what works in a mix and what gear they like and, you know, what pickups and, but yeah, it's a fun, there's some players who are on a constant journey of tone evolution and there's some who are like, the way they sounded at one point is the way they will effectively sound, you know, 10 years later.
Yeah, and I know that you thought a lot about the relationship between your hands and then the gear. Like how you're making sound with your hands. And I think sometimes that gets overlooked because people think, well, I could just kind of mitigate some technical issues with my hands if I have better gear. But I think the fundamental is in your hands, is my opinion.
Yeah, you guys know that, right?
I know you know, I just say that every day I can say it.
But you're a classical player, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's all
It's
in your
all
hands.
in my hands. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so
Don't disregard that. Who else has a question?
Hi. So when you were thinking of like complex like riffs and time signatures, so do you do it like kind of orally or on an instrument first or like on paper?
Never on paper. I think what happened is like I had a diet of odd metered music. So there's a lot of odd meter and progressive metal, and then it's actually a lot of like Indian classical music that has tons of 9/8 and all sorts of odd meters. I kind of got obsessed with tabla for a while, but I also was like listening to primarily like progressive metal bands that were exploiting rhythm in an interesting way. And I think if you consume a lot of that, it just starts to, like, you internalize it, and then your musical output represents your diet of music. So, yeah, so I think there are many ways to do it. If you're here learning, you know, the ins and outs of, like, rhythm, it might be that your process is more like an on-paper analytical approach. And then for some, it can be more of a, like for me, I think odd meter, I like to do it in a way that feels like you can internalize it, like, as opposed to like, I guess what I'm trying to say is there's ways you can use rhythmic complexity that can still feel kind of intuitive. I think Meshuggah does a good job of this because they ground everything against a quarter note pulse, even though you have these syncopated, oftentimes odd metered and eighth note based phrases cycling underneath what is like a very overt quarter note pulse. So you have this rhythmic illusion where you can kind of headbang in a quarter note, but the phrase is actually...
Yeah, just give us the backbeat, we're fine.
Yeah, right? The snare placements are like where you would expect in an even meter, but the actual musical phrase. So I found that to be one of the biggest sort of like rhythmic influences, because I liked how they merged both of these realities. So I kind of take this approach to where I still want the odd meter to quote unquote feel good and groove. Periphery kind of like, I think they really, they're a band who took this point and drilled it. But I also like really angular, obtuse. So there will be moments where things are just like, no one is headbanging to this. No one's tapping their toe to this. So I think that has like an impact as well. But to directly answer your question, I'm primarily self-taught. So like, it would be more work for me to try to like notate it down than it would be to just use my musical intuition to create a phrase.
I like this idea of the musical diet in relationship to what Toki was talking about communities, because I think, do you hear how deep he goes into listening? And I think that's a topic that comes up a lot. Like, are you listening? And not just are you listening, like scrolling and checking things out, but really going deep. So you're saying, well, this band does this in this way, and I'm going to take this, and then Indian classical music does this in this way. And Dave's nodding because that's what you did with all those other styles that you were exposed to here at Berklee. And it's very similar to what you're saying about like how deep you go into different communities, and what do you know about the actual musical components as well of what they're doing.
Yeah, there's like, music is a language, right? And language has structure, but the way we speak, we're not always thinking of like the devices of language, right? Predicates and pronouns and, you know, adverbs. But this is all, you can distill this stuff from language. So I think what can be useful is to hold on to like the poetry of music, right? To where there's this part of it that is greater than the sum of its parts. Like Western music, we're all using the same 12 notes or whatever, right? And there's like this like inherent system limitation on how we are making the music, and yet there's infinite expression there. And then there are certain ways of combining intervals and certain rhythms that just seem to stick in people's minds for reasons that are very hard to describe. And so this like ever elusive, why does this work like this? Even though you can be like, well, a 5-chord always wants to resolve to a 1-chord because you have the dump. Like, yeah, but also it feels good, right? So like, I really love this idea of like becoming like, you guys are basically becoming like music scientists, right? It's like, it's kind of funny, but I don't know if you know, like if you buy an Oreo cookie or Cheetos or something, there are chemists who are like in a lab. Like, that doesn't taste good because like the corn's really good and the spices are just right. Like, there are taste scientists who are just like, what's the mouthfeel? And like, they know how what percentage is actually based off of aroma because your olfactory glands register parts per million, but your taste buds only register 5 gross, senses. Like, and they are making things in a way, in a context that doesn't look anything like a kitchen, but the result can be really delicious, right? So I guess splitting the difference with how analytical your approach to music, the analytical part can explain to you why you like something a lot in some ways. It doesn't always get you to creating, the same thing, but it is definitely, I think, the only reasonable bridge to try to bridge that gap. But don't forget about that part of you that is the poetic part that kind of seems to be greater than the sum of its parts. You know what I mean? Yeah.
I was curious, being self-taught, how much of your ability to find a way that made sense for you to play came from your upbringing, came from your family history, the way people spoke in your house, what people listened to in your house, or you're anti?
Yeah, so this is actually a really interesting. My parents are from Nigeria, and I don't know if you ever heard Nigerian high life. It's all major triad. It sounds like sunny music. It's like the sun is shining where they made this music. That's just what I think of, right? It's like very and I remember being like, I don't like that. But a weird thing started to happen where I started doing certain rhythms and it was as if there was this latent, not with the harmony, but with certain things. It was almost as if there was a latent connection to some of this stuff. But I would say I did the opposite of like using like home base as a foundation, and because like when I was younger, no one really played. Okay, how do I explain this? I started playing guitar when like Nirvana and Pearl Jam and stuff like that were really popular, and I didn't know any black kids who played guitar, and funnily enough, a lot of the black kids in high school, they're like, that's devil music, and they were actually like uncomfortable with it. So then I wasn't able to source a community that represented like what I looked like, or find sources of players who are, because I mean, it's just not necessarily like, yeah, it's outside of the culture. Things have changed now, but back then, I had to basically let go of the idea that I would necessarily be represented in the music I was like attracted to. And so what was interesting about that is it fortified this sort of like, okay, I just gotta be me, even though I don't necessarily have direct representation, which is useful when like the music I'm making also isn't really that popular anyway. Like there are less people in general who like this music, let alone. And so I had to reinforce this like internal sense of like, well, I like it, you know? And then it started to create a community of people who didn't necessarily look like me, but we all liked the same music. And that was almost like better, because there was something more universal about it than being like the obvious like point of contact. It was like, all right, we have different backgrounds, but we both really like Yngwie Malmsteen. Yeah, I think the influences from your background can be a thing where it defines what you sound like, or sometimes it can be the reason you go very far from where you're coming from, you know? Yeah, kind of a weird trajectory.
One of the things I love about everything you're saying is that you have this super honest, like very enthusiastic, this is what I love about music, this is what I'm putting together, and then the science part. Well, why does it work? And what could I take from this to make the music better? But then also the two of you together, then it's like, oh, well, maybe this part appeals to this audience, and then maybe we could build here, and hey, there's not a lot of cool instruments, we could build this part of our business, and like, so it's like the science and the poetry that come together, and it's just constant curiosity, and instead of feeling, it feels like from hearing both of you talk that you're less bogged down by all of the negative kind of talk or discourse or like about the music business and about how difficult it is and more about, well, this is what I love and I bet there's a place for it, so let's figure it out.
Yeah, because I think monetize, like all art has existed before capitalism. Like we obviously have tried to merge the two, but I think the artists that I like, I think they're not necessarily the best capitalists. I think they're just really good artists. And I think the reason they're successful is because their output is artistically good and people are willing to put money into it. So depending on the type of player you are, you can have really great marketing strategies and you could be very business-minded and that could be a key to your success. Or you could just be really committed to your musical vision and hone it to the point where people really resonate with it. And that could be the reason you're successful. You can obviously split the difference, but I find that a lot of artists aren't. I think modern reality is asking the artist to be both, kind of like, and I think it's reasonable to develop these skill sets, to market yourself well and develop these strategies, but don't get disheartened if you feel just really more compelled by the music you're making. There's ways in which that can be the reason you're successful. And there are people who, they can't play guitar or write anything, but they really love marketing. So maybe what it is you find a team, and you don't have to be the person doing all the different facets, you know?
The other thing is all these listeners here are at a college, and I thought it was cool that the name of your band comes from literature. And I wondered, like, is that like a one-time thing, or are you a reader? Like, are you influenced by other things outside of music that inspire you?
Yes. Yeah, I think you kind of touched on this a little bit, but like, it's the extension of community, your own culture, and then other things that influence you that aren't music, but you can end up pulling these things into your musical aesthetic. I think there are a lot of powerful ideas that aren't musical, but they can inspire me musically. So I read a lot of science fiction, and I really loved these hypothetical futures of human reality where technology has been so impactful that like reality itself is slightly different.
Yeah.
And it would give me this feeling of like, whoa, this is like a slightly different world sort of thing. But I think harmony and rhythm have an ability to evoke similar feelings. Like if you combine harmony in the right way, you can give people emotions that are hard to identify, right? Because you're like,
Totally.
yeah.
Yeah, where all you can do is receive. Like, you can't just say, oh, I know what that is, log it in, and then, like, kind of space out.
Yeah.
Now, when you do that, when you combine harmony rhythm in unique ways, everyone's compelled to listen. It's like it commands
You can hook
attention.
people,
Yeah.
and it's like, what am I hearing? It's not easily identifiable, and the feeling I'm having isn't easily identifiable. And I remember reading certain fiction that would give me the same experience. So that started to inform my musical choices, because I wanted this sort of otherworldly effect on people. So that's how something like literature can impact. And then I think even things like fashion or architecture, like music is still an aesthetic choice, even though it's sonic. But the sum total of these creative decisions has a cohesive result, which is effectively an aesthetic. It's like freaking Frank Zappa's aesthetic is very different than Paul McCartney's. You know what I mean? It's not just because, and when I say aesthetic, I mean like the sum total of their musical choices, their creative choices. There's like a synesthetic sort of like, it's like you're hearing sounds, but you might be also seeing colors and feelings, right? It's not merely just sonic output. So I feel like if you're open-minded, you can look at things like design and architecture, because these are conceptually driven as well. Things like brutalism or parametric architecture, any of these things where these are people who are taking progressive approaches to making a building or something. And there is an impact on the viewer when you see something like a concrete structure that's tons of facets and whatever the case is, right? It's like, it's very different than seeing a cottage that has that feels way more organic and welcoming, right? So there's ways in which aesthetics can inform our music, and oftentimes it's because of the choices you don't make. So I think we can be inundated with creative decisions because there's so much to choose from, but I feel like sometimes it's the things you don't do in your music that literally define what it is.
Yeah.
And so these are deep concepts that people who make visual art and who make architecture, there's schools of thought, like Bauhaus, or there's like actual schools of thought that define why this aesthetic exists, what is the ethos. And it's interesting to look how creative people have almost created philosophies around what they create. And you can map that stuff onto how you're making music as well. Like have a very, almost like a philosophical approach to your musical output, which ultimately will affect what it sonically sounds like. So yeah.
That's so great. Does anyone else
We have about 10 minutes left, so.
I think we could grab a couple more questions and then
Uh-huh.
maybe you all have some final thoughts. But Kyla, sorry, go ahead.
Here. Wait, I'm gonna step on our questions.
My question, hello?
Yep.
Okay. My question is, who were your biggest guitar inspirations growing up and learning?
Okay, I'm gonna make I would say, people, so Steve Vai, Yngwie Malmsteen, Alan Holdsworth, Frederick Dorndahl, Kurt Rosenwinkel, Adam Rogers, okay, maybe that's it. I mean, it's hard not to make an endless list, but I think these are due to, I can remember the impact upon hearing them and how much I've wanted to steal from them. So, yeah.
Hello. I know with animals as leaders, I've always seen selective picking and dumping as the main focus that you always push in front of your music. I want to get your opinion and thoughts on bands that use as a supporting, Little Tybee or Gabriel Levi, where they have vocals that they're supporting with the thumping. I've always found that's a very different harmonic choices or melodic ideas over something that's very percussive. I wonder your thoughts on that.
I think it sounds good. Making instrumental music is interesting because I realized how much the human voice compels people. And when you don't have that, you lose a percentage of people. They're like, where's the singer? I'm like, it's still music. So, to your point, these guys are taking some kind of advanced guitar techniques and they have melodic vocals over it, and I think it's great. Yeah.
Hi. Oh, wow. So I was wondering, you have talked a lot about how like your tone is kind of your voice, and how like you had all these guitarists that you looked up to that you wanted to steal from when you were like developing your sound. But you have like such a unique sound now, and like everyone in this room knows that. But I was wondering what like the number one moment was when everything kind of clicked and you realized this is what Tosin Abasi sounds like. What was that like?
That's a good question. I feel like the thumping thing definitely just became pretty central to, I guess, my identity as a player, even though it's not 100% of what I do, but I think it's so distinct in the guitar space. And I didn't even invent it, but I saw it in a funk context, and I was like, dude, if you did that with like double bass and odd meter, that'd be really cool. So I like repurposed it. And at this point, it's kind of become mildly synonymous, and I think there's ways in which I've had to make tones to play the stuff the way I wanted to hear it. I was forced to like, all right, what tones work best for this novel technique that not many people are doing? So sometimes the tone identity thing is a result of like how you're playing the guitar. If you're a blues player, then it's like, okay, maybe you like Vemorim for fuzz and you don't really like the octave, whatever. There's the toolbox of fuzzes that you're just gonna, it's like, is it Mr. Pibb or Dr. Pepper, right? But then there's sometimes you're doing a thing, like with the selective picking stuff, I realized that I started getting into like music from Mali, like Baseko Kuyate and stuff, like Mali music. So it's like it's African music that like uses a stringed instrument that's it's guitar-like, but it's got a gourd as the body, and there's like this really percussive, constantly arpeggiated thing. A lot of it's odd metered. I've never heard anything like it, but then I realized like, whoa, I really like this muted, percussive, arpeggiated sound. So I started doing this like selective picking stuff that that was part of my reference, was this like music from Mali, but now the context in which I play it in, it just sounds, sometimes things sound unique because they don't exist in metal, they exist elsewhere, but they don't exist in metal, so then when you put them in there, they start to sound like you haven't heard it, but it's just because you haven't heard Malian music, So, yeah.
Joe, you want to grab a couple?
Yeah.
Hello. So, what does it take to like get a signature guitar or like a custom-made guitar? Because I know nothing about that.
Okay. So, musical instrument companies that are going to endorse you are using you as like marketing. It's because you're on stage wearing their guitar. That's why they want to give you the guitar, usually. So what does it take? It usually, in a perfect world, it's because you're really good at guitar, and they're like, we want this guy to be playing our guitars. But we've all seen dudes with signature instruments who maybe aren't that good, but they have a lot of fans. So I would say, ideally, you're touring in a band, or you have some sort of social media profile that's got some degree of reach, because unfortunately, they are not necessarily like using their like hearts and souls is the reason they're giving you a guitar. But so there's ways in which like we'll have this conversation too with Jews we want to, because we actually are using our hearts and souls when we're deciding on who to endorse. And Ivan's more practical than I am, so like this guy's pretty good, but doesn't have any tours lined up, sort of thing. I'm like, okay. So there's a reality where there's balance to it, but I guess to answer your question, you could strategize in a way where it's like you make yourself attractive to these companies, and that basically relates to your visibility.
There's also a layer of how do you fit in within the roster of a given company. We had this conversation a lot where there's somebody who could be an incredible player. The profile almost comes secondary because we decide we can help build that in certain cases. But it'd be how they fit into the collection of players that are representing these guitars. For us, it was important to show that these guitars are, it started out as Tosin's signature guitar with another company, but it's actually capable of all these other styles of music. How do we represent that with these artists? So I think if there's a company you're thinking of or some guitar you're interested in, asking yourself, how do you fit in? What piece of the puzzle do you add that the company might be trying to portray with their guitars? Some are very decidedly like, we make metal guitars, or we make jazz boxes, whatever it is. Others will have a broader range, but understanding that culture and seeing how you might fit into it, it could be part of the answer.
I just want to say that another thing that can be so challenging that you just brought up, Ivan, is just remember that every opportunity sometimes has to do with like the moment and the fit and where you are and where the company is. And sometimes when things don't work out the first time, there's this thing that people do where they're like, well, that's just bullshit them and they don't care about me and I'm not good enough. You internalize it. And it might just not have been the right moment or the right thing that they're looking at. It doesn't even mean that they don't think you're great. It's just that right now we have to do this thing. And I think that was such a nice point that you made, that it's really helpful.
Yeah, I like how you put that, because sometimes you can see another player and you're like, well, I have a bigger following and my alternate picking is better.
Yeah,
why am
that's
I
right.
Ross?
Yeah,
it's
that's
like,
right.
Well, it goes beyond those things, and it's a larger picture of how you might fit into the context of the company.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I know there are others that had questions, but hopefully a lot of what everyone said has answered some of them. And you can always write to us with follow-ups and your feedback and stuff. But before we go, is there a final bit of advice you'd like to share with everyone?
Yeah, I would say embrace inspiration, and really, I think, be committed to what you're doing if music is what you want to do. There will be negative reinforcement, there will be challenges, but you cannot predict where you end up. But if you're committed to a goal, you'd be surprised. It's actually more achievable than you think. And I think the people who achieve it are potentially the people who just didn't drop out of their own dream, you know what I mean? So you got this. I think pursuing music is a worthwhile pursuit. I think even if society collapsed, we would still value musicians. You know what I mean? So, yeah, try to just stay inspired and don't get discouraged.
That's such a nice note to end on, and I just want to say thank you, Toki, for being here. Here's a really wonderful resource in the Pro Music department, Toki and all his faculty and the classes that we collaborate on, hoping that you'll take advantage of. Thank you, Dave Marvuglio, our metal leader of the Ensemble department, and thank you, Ivan, for coming back and sharing all your wisdom. And I hear you're sometimes nearby, so we'll have to have you more. And thank you, Tosin.
My pleasure. Thanks for coming early.